Tonight's presenter is Ken Graff. Ken has authored the book Mr. Ryan's Field to preserve and share the history of Hemet's Ryan Field. His presentation tonight, the story of Riverside County's Hemet Ryan Airport and a history of local aviation, features stories from his book, which is available for purchase here, correct? All right. And Ryan Field has had a significant impact on the lives of thousands of people through its significance in World War II, its connections to the amazing history of crop dusting, and its key base for firefighting airplanes. So that being said, without further ado, sir, would you like to take over?
And I'll use this. I'll just use this, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. And there was a newspaper article or some stuff somebody showed me, and it said that I started hanging around the airport in 1947. There's a little typo. I was still in diapers in 1947. I started hanging around the airport, and before I start here, grew up in Hemet. Sunday was take a drive with the family. So my dad, mom, and 3 brothers and I are driving around down here one Sunday afternoon. Saw an airplane go down behind a hill right over here and disappear. So Dad goes around the corner, and we found that airplane on a landing strip at Marietta Hot Springs with 2 other airplanes, and they were spreading blankets out on the ground and having a picnic. We got back to Hemet, and I got the phone book. I called the Ryan Airport number. It was 4 digits at the time, and started asking questions. I'm 11 years old. How much does an airplane cost? How do you learn how to fly? What does it cost to learn how to fly? And it must have been a really boring day at the airport, because that guy that answered the phone talked to me for almost 20 minutes and answered every stupid question I had. The next weekend, I rode my bike to the airport with 35 cents in my pocket for a Coke and a candy bar. And I was there ever since, just about. So, history of aviation at Ryan Field. Things started in San Jacinto. In 1898, the first balloon came to San Jacinto. Took some people for rides. Not a lot of news or history about that, but that's what happened in 1898. The next big news took place in 1913 when a deep-producing airplane landed at the Hemet stock farm that had been flying around the country doing demonstrations and trying to sell a deep-producing airplane to anybody that had enough money to buy one. Around the same time, Joe Barrows was born in San Jacinto. His dad was a Santa Fe Railroad conductor and station manager, and Joe wanted to become a pilot. So he left home while World War I was raging. He went to LA to learn how to fly. He learned how to fly, soloed at the age of 16, but the war ended before he had a chance to get into it. So Joe somehow gets his hands on a World War I Curtiss Jenny, and he starts giving rides and flying lessons in the valley. He'd worked his way down the coast, comes back to Hemet, back to home, and starts giving rides to these kids. Him and a guy named Rollo Hazeltine had a little landing strip at the corner of Sanderson and Florida Avenue in the 1920s, and they were giving kids rides. Anybody that had $5 could go for an airplane ride. Kids could ride for free. In 1924, a gal named Mary Worthylake was a school teacher, came to San Jacinto visiting her parents, or grandparents. She saw Joe's airplane, bought a ride, and they started dating. They got married later that year, and their honeymoon flight was just a barnstorming trip from San Jacinto up to Oregon. And when they got to Oregon, they decided to keep on going. Joe gets up to Alaska, hooks up with some other guys up there, started an airmail service, and I've connected the dots from that airmail service on today to Alaska Airlines. Mary had some kids, got out of the flying business, and stayed at home while Joe went running around the country with people doing all kinds of crazy things. The Valley's first dedicated public airport was Harmon Field in San Jacinto. It was named after Colonel Harmon, who was the commander of March Air Force base at the time. And the idea was, if we named the field after Colonel Harmon, then all of them Air Force guys from March Field, or Army Air Force guys, would fly over to Hemet, land in San Jacinto there, and maybe eat lunch in one of the local cafes or something. So it was a business deal. In this picture, Harmon standing on the truck bed giving a speech. The lady in the center, with a helmet on, is a woman named Bobby Trout, who's the holder of the women's endurance record at the time. And coincidentally, I found out later, the photographer standing over here on the right side was Vicki McWane's grandfather. Vicki and Matt had a funeral home up there in Hemet still today. Some other celebrities at that grand opening. You got Bobby Trout over here on the left. You got Cliff Henderson was the director of LA airports. He came out to see what's going on. Lieutenant Ogden was one of the first around the world pilots. He's standing there with Colonel Harmon about to the right side. Roman Warren in the cowboy hat was known as the cowboy aviator, pretty well known around Riverside County at the time, and later became a county supervisor, and today has a little 2-block street named after him up in Winchester. And then there's Joe Barrows over on the end with his signature hat. In the 1930s, there were 3 public landing fields in the valley. Saboba Hot Springs was on the left side there, was an attraction to movie people out of Hollywood. They fly out from Hollywood, land at that little strip, go to the hot springs, and do their whatever they do at hot springs. Harmon Field in the middle at San Jacinto, and then Groves Field was a farmer. The Groves family had a landing strip next to Warren Road, just south of the railroad tracks. In 1937, with 3 other airfields in the valley used by local pilots, 3 Russian guys made history, landing in a field at the northeast corner of Cottonwood and Sanderson Avenue. Those are all 4-lane streets now surrounded by houses and a sewer farm and everything else, but that's where the airplane landed, 1937. Advertised and known as the world's first transpolar flight, made by 3 Russian men landing in 1937. They made headlines around the world, put San Jacinto on the map. While they'd planned to land in San Diego, fog changed all that. With fuel running low, they decided they'd find a sunny place to land. And at first light that morning, they landed at 6:27 in San Jacinto. The article that they first put out about these guys, they misspelled their names, we found out later. And after flying to 6,305 miles, in 62 hours and 17 minutes, the crew climbed out of the plane, walked up to a local farmer named Walter Harvey, who'd watched them land, and handed him pre-printed notes asking him to call the Soviet embassy, and then a card that said bath, eat, and sleep. All but one of the gathering crowd was pretty friendly. In California at the time, they're kind of after, saving the grapes and orchard, the citrus and everything. So the ag inspector happens to come out there, sees the pilot eating half a sucked lemon, grabs that half sucked lemon out of the guy's hand, gets on the airplane and confiscated the rest of the contraband fruit that was in the cockpit. Dairyman Earl Smith owned the field that they landed in. He was a pretty smart businessman. He put a fence around or a rope around the place and charged everybody 25 cents to take a look at the airplane. Now, we all thought for years that the first transpolar flight landed in San Jacinto. But there's a spoiler alert. There was actually 3 of these airplanes built in Russia. The idea was they're going to compete for long-distance airline travel, passenger travel, and so forth. They wanted to compete with the records that Amelia Earhart was setting that year for long-distance flights and everything. So they're going to launch 2 of these airplanes from Russia at the same time. They're both going to head over the North Pole and see who gets there first. One of the pilots, this guy named Valery Chokolov on the left there, 33 years old, kind of a showman, kind of a hot rod, and a little bit of a hot dog, paid the maintenance crew to take the engine off the other guy's airplane and hide it. I didn't know this until just a while back, but they actually hid the other guy's engine. This guy took off, and he and his crew were actually the first transpolar flight. And they landed in Washington State at Pearson Field in Vancouver Barracks in June, 3 weeks before the other guys did. But they'd been lost. They'd flown 63 hours and 16 minutes, 5,288 miles, and they landed with only 11 gallons of fuel left in their tanks. The other guy found his engine, got it put back on the airplane, and he took off. Lands in San Jacinto. So why is San Jacinto the famous deal? It's a public location. A lot of people could come see it. Gromov, who landed in San Jacinto, was a popular guy. He wasn't a showman or a hot dog. He was more of a political type person. And those guys went to parades and met movie stars in Hollywood and everything else before they went home. So San Jacinto is the one that survived the history of the first transpolar flight. The other airplane has a little placard on a little brass placard where it landed at that base, which is now closed. So they don't get a lot of history. Back in the valley, I was talking about Groves Ranch. That's where it was located. In this photograph, it's not there anymore, but Warren Road, the railroad tracks, Ryan Field is up there in the top right corner of the picture. And it was just a dirt strip, but popular with local guys. It was the home to Hemet's first airmail plane. It was flown by Bill Bader, bringing airmail service to the valley, and Bader later became a flight instructor at Ryan School during the war years. Lloyd Venable also flew from Groves Strip, giving flying lessons in his Waco. He then became an instructor at Ryan Field in 1940. And in the 20s and 30s, there were several aviators flying from small landing strips all around the valley. There was probably 7 of them, 7 little landing strips. Everybody had a flat spot with no trees, no wires, could have a landing strip. And airplanes at that time were pretty easy to come by, didn't have a lot of regulations and rules, so anyone that could get off the ground and fly one. Hans Christensen and his son Lloyd watched over their farm from the airfield whenever they could with their little 2-cylinder Aeronica up there on the left. And Vernon Everett Ward farmed thick-rind watermelons in San Jacinto in 1928, operated a gas station over on Box Springs Grade, and would fly back and forth between their ranch and Box Springs and their American Eagle. If the weather was bad, they rode their motorcycles. The Curtis Jenny, the one that was Joe Barrows had used to teach so many to fly in, was available to anybody after the war. And in 1932, Frank Holstrom bought one, flew out of McNulty's pasture over there. You guys probably don't know where that is. And Frank McNulty and his younger brother, along with their friend Monk Shields, pooled their money and bought a Jenny for themselves. Frank was the careful one, the other two not so. McNulty brothers and Shields were out one day chasing cows at Records Dairy, which is still there. And they underestimated the pull of gravity and both lost their lives when the Jenny fell from the sky. Now, in 1938, Hemet didn't have an airport. There was a private strip over at Groves Field, and the San Jacinto had their own public airport, and Gilman Hot Springs. So a bunch of businessmen got together, decided they'd go down to San Diego and talk to some guy named Ryan that had a flying school down there and contract to teach pilots for the government how to fly. So they go down to San Diego, cut a deal with Ryan, and the plan was put into motion to construct an airport, a flying school at Hemet. It was approved in 1939, and it was the final approval in July 13th. July 22nd, they started construction. And when construction started, Charles Howard of the Howard Rose Company was put in charge of making sure the facility would be ready to receive students by September. How long is it between July and September? It's not very long. There's an aerial photo at the top. The supplies were delivered the week of July 22nd, 1940. 60 days later, September 20th, the bottom photo was taken. Can you imagine that? Today, you can't even get up. It takes you 60 days to get your permit filed to do anything. And it's going to take you longer than that to get it approved. But these guys built 2 hangars, barracks for students, and facilities to feed them, house them, and train them, at least to get started, in 60 days. Okay, come on. There we go. The first 16 instructors in September 1940 are shown here. They came up from the school in San Diego to get things off the ground, and then they started getting the local instructors, and instructors from other places started coming to work. This picture here, Lloyd Venable is in the bottom row, 3rd from the right, and eventually there were over 200 flight instructors. 200 flight instructors divided into 12 squadrons at Ryan Field. In addition to the flight instructors, there were 9 ground school instructors and 11 link trainer instructors. The link trainer is a little box on a stick or on a little motion thing. They put the student in there, close the lid over his head, and he flies simulated instruments without being able to see the ground. And the instructor follows him at one of those desks there to see if he stayed on the course he was supposed to follow. The first class of 15 students arrived from San Diego to complete their training at the new school. And when they first got there, they drove up from the Ryan School in San Diego. They got to Hemet. There was no water in the barracks yet. Food was kind of cold when it got to them, but they were the first class. And here's their graduation photo in October of 1940. 15 of them. Of the 15, 14 were sent directly to Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, where they got their advanced training, and all 14 of them were sent to the Philippines, where they were this picture was taken just before, well, taken in November. When they turned it over to the county of Riverside. There's Venable, Hanna, and Ankrum when they started Hemet Valley Flying Service. That's the first fleet and the crew, and the first TBM they converted in 1955. That's some of the airplanes that they operated over the years, became one of the largest operators in the world. We had more airplanes than some governments had. All right, other things going on in Hemet. In 1949, Atlas Aircraft Company came in, and they were going to build this airplane in Hangar 5. It lasted about a year. One airplane was completed and finally ended up in, the last photo of it was in, I think, Long Beach in the 1980s. Parachute jumping started in 1959 with Hemet Sport Parachute Center, and it lasted about 2 years. It was very popular. That's what the airport looked like in 1959, and you can't see me in the picture, but I'm probably by the Coke machine with my 35 cents next to that gas truck. That's what Hangar 5 looked like in 1959 when Hemet Valley moved from Hangar 1 down to Hangar 5. And that's what it looked like 6 months later. And if you notice the palm trees in front, that was my first job. 12 years old, I planted those palm trees. Hemet Valley started Valley Airways. It lasted about 8 months, and it flew scheduled flights from Hemet to Ontario, Redlands, and LAX, and weekend flights to Vegas if people were interested. And this is Bob Venable, the older of the two Venable boys, and one of the popular things was always put a bigger engine on it. Any airplane could carry so many gallons of retardant or spray, but if you put a bigger engine on it, it could carry more. So if you look at 7.1 is a stock airplane. The propeller is pretty close to the cowling. 7.4 has got about almost 1,000 more horsepower stuck under the cowling. Custom make it, exhaust stacks and everything else. That's me putting gas in the airplane and Bob looking at the fuel gauge down below. And this was the air tanker base in 1965. Bob's brother Jim Venable flew TBM 73, and 60 years later now his son Mike Venable is flying S2 number 73, still today. Lloyd Venable watching his boys fly. Now that's what I'm talking about, the Litchfield Air Park. You can see how the airplanes were lined up. They're just all going to be tore apart or smelted. Take an engine off one, stick it on another, fly it home, put a tank on it, and that's what the fleet looked like in 1968 about. TBMs to PBYs, and if you see in the back under the wing of the PBY is the very first S2 tanker. Hemet Valley converted the first S2s. And here we have a Super Y, again with bigger engines put on it. It could carry a little more than the 1,000-gallon straight PBY could. Scooping water up at Lake Hemet in this photograph, and our airplanes, two of them went down to Chile, scooping water for the Chilean government down there. Before the Canadians had the CL-215 and the Super Scooper and all of that, we were doing it with these airplanes. Here's the Hemet Valley C-119 landing at Portland, or Medford, Oregon, and one dropping retardant up at Big Bear. And this was one of two airplanes that were modified to do aerial seeding. Back in the 70s, when a fire burned, the Forest Service liked to go back and plant annual ryegrass seed to stop erosion. One of the biggest fires at the time was 155,000 acres. They wanted to put 1.5 million pounds of ryegrass seed on it, and they were going to allow 30 to 35 days to get the job done. We modified two C-119s with big seed hoppers inside and put 1.5 million pounds of seed on in 10 working days. And there's the KC-97 getting woke up at Tucson. There it is sitting up at Stockton getting modified. And there it is getting ready to go to Alaska. There was 3 of them there. I'm going to blast through these because she's going to run out of coffee and fall asleep back there pretty soon. This was 2004 in Alaska. A couple of DC-4s that the company operated, and then the C-130, the first test flight preparations in 1990. You can see it was the first C-130 to have a tank built with the doors through the bottom to drop like a real airplane should. There's the painted airplane getting ready to go to work, and there's 2 of them getting ready to go to France for the fire season in France. And the Hemet Valley Ag Fleet started with Stearman's, went to Pawnees, Call Airs, and then the M18 Drometer, which was built in Poland. And we had the distributorship for the 11 western states. It was the largest single-engine airplane, ag airplane, ever mass-produced. Took it up to Stockton and got the Forest Service to re-implement the single-engine air tanker program. When the state went to S2s, they stopped using TBMs, which were the last single-engine tanker, and says, we're not going to do any more single-engine airplanes. We're all going to do multi-engine, until the M18 came along, and we showed them it would work. Hemet Valley also did other special projects. This is one, a Cessna modified to do pheromone experiments in Arizona and Arkansas for Monsanto. Had a contract with the DEA and Treasury Department to pick up airplanes and store them while they went through legal processes until they could be sold. This Cessna was a drug runner from Florida to the strip up in the desert. The pilot took his drugs to town to sell them, and they shot him and killed him. And that's me in the hat picking the airplane up to bring it to Hemet. There's still a lot of other stuff going on at Hemet besides Hemet Valley Flying Service. In 1949, let me back up a bit. 1949, the first glider flew out of Hemet, and it was towed up by one of the Hemet Valley pilots, Del Hanna, as a matter of fact. And then in 1969, Carl Jessup and Don Slotin leased some property from the airport from the county and opened Sailplane Enterprises. And that's what it grew to be. It was one of the largest sailplane operations in the western United States and very popular with everybody. And that top left picture is astronaut Neil Armstrong, who came out here to fly gliders. In 1980, Hemet Ryan Aviation was incorporated by Ron Hardin, Guy Sultan, Glenn Holland, and Hemet native Lloyd Cliff and his wife Randy started Hemet Ryan Maintenance out of that hangar, taking care of the airplanes that those other 3 guys were flying. Within a few years, Lloyd and Randy assumed ownership of the whole thing and started Hemet Ryan Aviation. And with that, they had a balloon repair station. They took 2 of the old barracks from the military side of the airport that were going to be destroyed, moved them across the railroad tracks. One of them became a restaurant, the other a museum. And then they hosted a fly-in as a reunion for pilots and planes that had been at Ryan during World War II. 1994, Doug Medore and his father, retired Lieutenant Colonel Art Medore, brought Ban Air and Prop and Jet Museum from the Banning Airport to Ryan Field and offered aerobatic training and everything else that you could think of. And then let's move on. 1997, Don and Robin Balch moved to Ryan from Paris and started skydiving adventures out of Hangar 4, which isn't there anymore today. And the cafe that started with the efforts of Hemet Ryan Aviation was taken over by Bambi Galloway in 2008. She started making these blue ribbon pies, and people would fly up from San Diego to get pie. They would call from San Diego, "You have any pies left?" "Yes." They'd fly up here and get a couple of pies and take them back to their little flying club in San Diego. Over the years, some of the other businesses at the airport, Inland Avionics, Aircraft Sheet Metal, Aircraftman, Inland Aircraft Interiors, Advanced Avionics, the Ultralight Store, and Mercier, Skyline Trailers, when they came out here from Chicago, set their first manufacturing up at Ryan Field. They needed chassis to put the trailers on, so Zeman Manufacturing came out and started manufacturing trailer chassis in Hangar 3, while Skyline was building the trailers to sit on them in Hangar 2. And then when Zeman moved away, they left a bunch of equipment, and William Robacher, started custom cabs where he would buy these little Toyota pickups, the first ones that were brought over from Japan. He'd buy these little Toyota pickups off the boat, bring a truckload of them out to Hemet, cut the things in half, and weld an extended cab section in the middle, put a seat in there, and just grew the thing to what is today a crew cab pickup. Made his mark in the transportation industry right there at Hemet. Hangar 5, the last of the original hangars, is still there, and if you notice today, those are the palm trees that I planted when I was 11 years old. And so I think that's about the end of it. I'm going to leave you with this. A mile of road can take you a mile, but a mile of runway can take you anywhere. You still awake back there? Okay. All right, guys, that's it. I got some books up here if you want them. If you got any questions, I didn't study, but I am so full of crap, I could probably fake it. Okay. Go.
Where do they fly the gliders now?
Well, the gliders were actually, the gliders that were there with Sailplane Enterprises were told to leave the airport because they thought they're going to move the tanker base across the runway. That never happened. About 5 or 6 years ago, some guys came back and says, "Can we start gliding at Hemet again?" And the county gave them permission to do that. So they have a sailplane operation on the airport now in the same area as Sailplane used to be. You enter off of Warren Road right there by that manufacturing plant. There's a little gate, and you have to go back, but there has to be somebody there to open the gate to let you in. But you can go in there and go for glider rides or get lessons or whatever, I believe. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Is that museum still there?
Yes. Doug Medore, Art died several years ago, but Doug is still there. He's still got all the airplanes, is constantly adding more. But he's a full-time pilot with UPS. He flies international from Ontario to Tokyo and Hong Kong and back. So he's usually around on weekends, but you have to kind of know he's going to be there to get in to see him. And they also fence the airport off, so you can sneak in through the cafe entrance and go out there. Bambi sold, I'll tell you what, Bambi sold the cafe to David Clark on January 1st of this year, and Dave Clark, who owns a towing service, and his wife kept all the original staff, are still there, but I don't think they make pies.
What were the structural problems with the C-130?
The wings would break off. Two of them went down. The Hawkins and Powers had three of them flying. We had two of them flying, and we're building more. And the Powers airplane wing came off up in Central California. And then it happened again with a Hemet Valley airplane up by Los Angeles. So the Forest Service had no more C-130s. And that was pretty much the end.
And question on flying. When did March Air Force Base take off? And no pun intended there, but
March Air Force Base began actually with some training during World War I. 1917 is when it started. And you know these little historical books you see all over the place? There's one of those on March Field, if you can find it.
Any more questions?
Yeah, my wife's over there. She wants to know when I'm going to take her to dinner.
So for the S2s, I know they used to lend those on carriers, right? So
Yes.
did they? You mentioned that they've made the conversion at Hemet for the S2, the first one.
Yes. The
They
first
did-
two were converted at Hemet, and the tanks and the first two airplanes were designed by Floyd Wakely, who was the state forestry guy at the time in Sacramento. Square bottom, 4 doors. And after the first two airplanes worked as good as they did, they went and got 17 more of them
Right.
out of Davis Motham, and Hemet Valley did the airplane conversion and electronics, radios and communications and stuff. Aero Union up in Chico built the tanks, so all the round tanks were built in Chico, brought down, and the airplanes were cut and the tanks put in at Hemet.
Okay.
Radios put in at Hemet. And the first 4 or 5 of them were painted in Hemet, but then they took them to a paint shop in Upland to have the rest of them painted over there. Now, the turbines were built in Mesa, Arizona.
When did the OV-10s come along? Do you know?
I don't know. There was sometime after I left.
Any other questions? Well, yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, Ryan Field. Here's the deal. The FAA came out several years ago and said you got to have security around airports. So yes, the airport is open to the public. You can fly in anytime. But if you want to walk in, you got to go through a locked gate somewhere, unless you're going to go to the cafe, which has an open gate. So if you want to sneak into the airport, you go to Hangar 1 Cafe, you go around and just walk out there anywhere you want. Yeah. Absolutely over the moon. Yes, absolutely delicious.
Got a couple of affirmatives on that one.
I got some books up here if you want them. They're $20 a piece. If not, I'll just throw them in the bag and take them home.
All right. Anybody else? With that being said, a big thank you to Ken for being here tonight. Well, I guess you will.
Yes. So, has this been a great program? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. So, would you like to know what's happening next month for our fourth Monday? We're going to have a botanist talk about the value of trees. And now you might think, what's that got to do with Temecula history? Well, he's going to be talking especially about the oak trees and how important it was to our early people here, our first people here.
Trees make shade, and shade is very important to your health. Don't stand in the sun if you can stand in the shade.
Good answer there. So we'll come clean. The little electrical issue was pre-planned. Jim was working with SCE just to make a point, so you felt how warm it started to get, and now how comfortable it is again. Nice job, Jim. Way to show off, man. All right. Once again, let's see. Thank you for being here tonight. Let's see. Let's get Jim over here. Is gonna, if anybody's interested, he's got his talk on the 16th of August at Temecula Valley Museum, 11 a.m. And also, he's the gentleman that is coordinating a trip to France next year. Man, I might want to have to join you. And the other thing, we're always looking for volunteers. You hear the broken record here. So if you're trying to figure out something to do with your time, we've got some ideas for you. And with that being said, Bonnie,
Since I have a captured audience, can I do a non-history thing? Okay. On the 16th of August, I think that's 16th Saturday, I'm going to do a paint and sip. We're raising money for the Temecula Valley Symphony. So if anybody's interested in painting, if you go on the Symphony website, it has a picture of what we're doing and all the info. Thank you. Same day.
and with that being said, thank you for being here tonight. Once again, I got the books up here. And we look forward to seeing you all back here next month, the 4th Monday of August. Maybe it'll be like 110 outside, so we can really celebrate being in here, right? Yeah, I'm going to beat that like a dead horse, man. So, all right. Thank you so much.